This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, Alex Simon, advocate with CoPIRG, here today for another conversation from the Capitol, this time with Senator Bob Rankin. Senator Rankin sponsored SB 176, which provides funding for passenger rail corridor development. We know increasing rail service can improve transportation options for people, which can decrease traffic and decrease pollution. Senator Rankin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Before we dive into this bill, I was hoping we could just touch briefly on what motivated you to get into politics in the first place.
Well, I suppose curiosity. I had been a corporate executive and involved in some small businesses and nonprofits, but I didn't know much about government. So I thought I would do that for a few years. And here we are 10 years later. So.
Nice. I love it. It's great to try new things and great that you've been with it 10 years. As I mentioned before, SB 176 will provide funding for passenger rail corridor development. Why did you choose to sponsor this bill this legislative session, and why is improving rail service important to you?
Well, actually, I'm a Western Slope legislator, so the Front Range rail corridor probably won't affect my constituents as much as others, but as a member of the Joint Budget Committee, I was really approaching it from the financial structure and sort of the issues of public and legislative involvement. So I saw this. I mean, that purchase had been done by the High Performance Transportation Enterprise without any legislative input. And that concerned me a little bit because it's a very important project. And so I saw this as the legislature actually getting involved. It does really two things, or three really. It provides funding for the NEPA process, the environmental assessment, but it also draws in the local community to be involved in planning. And that project is more than just transportation. The enterprise will be looking for partners to use some of the property for other purposes. So the financial structure was pretty interesting, and I felt that the Joint Budget Committee and the legislature should really be involved in the structure of the process and to monitor it as it went forward. So my interest was more from the Budget Committee responsibility and perspective than it was as a strong advocate for Front Range Rail.
Right. Well, that's really interesting. And yeah, thanks for sharing that perspective. It leads me into another question I wanted to ask you, which is, for those of our members who aren't as familiar with the Joint Budget Committee, could you speak just a little bit, I know you touched on it there, but about what that role of the committee does and its role in the legislative process, just at a really kind of high level for some of our members who may not be familiar with all those inner workings.
Yeah, well, the Budget Committee is 6 members, and I joke about being the longest surviving member. I'll be going into my 9th budget, and I've been in the minority on that committee for the whole time, representing first the House and now the Senate. So it's been an interesting process. It's very much different from the other committees. We actually work a lot more. We start in early November, and it's the only bill that's required to be completed in the Constitution. So we worked right through COVID, actually in person the whole time to get the budget ready. And we've had 3 really historic years. We had the deepest cuts in the history of the state in 2020. We had restoration in 21, and then massive federal monies to appropriate in this last session. So it's been a really interesting time, and I really pride myself on using the word rural over and over. I want rural Colorado to be considered in every bill and every budget. So that, along with education and a few other things that I have come to work on and represent in the budget, it's been a real honor to be part of it, but it's very much a team effort. Most of the time, you can't tell who's a Republican and who's a Democrat in our sessions as we consider, each department, 22 different departments and agencies. So we're responsible for putting together, we start with the governor's recommended budget. We call it his recommendations, not the budget. We like to be independent on behalf of the legislature. And then we put all of that together and present that to the legislature. We have to get all of the other, or a majority of the other members of the legislature to actually support our budget recommendations. And believe me, they have amendments
Right.
presented. So it's a really interesting process. At this point, after 8 years, I would not want to do anything else in the legislature. It's just so much more involvement with government, with all of our government agencies, and interaction with our fellow legislators. It's a very inspiring part of our work, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that insight. And yeah, just the sense of teamwork coming out of the Joint Budget Committee and working together with all different types of folks. So that's really great. Thank you. And you mentioned too your role in supporting some education initiatives. And that leads us into another area I'd love to touch on. You know, sometimes you pass bills and it can take a few years before we see an impact. One of the issues we've worked on is open textbooks. So we know students can typically pay thousands of dollars for new textbooks every year just to have the most recent edition to keep up with their classes. Open textbooks refer to textbooks with an open copyright that can be more easily adapted, reused, and updated. Professors and students can typically use these textbooks for free, saving students thousands of dollars over the course of their college careers. I know you supported a bill that funded a pilot program for open textbooks in 2018, and was wondering if you had any updates or insight as to how that program was going.
Yeah, you know, we did extend that program. It was originally a pilot program, and extended it. So it has a 5-year life starting in 21 with about $1 million in grants and an administrative overload. You know, that was a joint budget committee bill. And one of the interesting things about that is that we are insisting on measurement when we're really pushing toward evidence-based budgeting, and we're making progress. And I've been very much an advocate for that. So because this was our own bill, we put measurements in, and I was just looking at that because I knew you were going to ask me, but we've spent a total of, so far, we spent $1.5 million on the grant program, and we actually have tried to measure the effect. We think that we have saved over $10 million for students in their savings and using this approach rather than buying textbooks. So, you know, I'm proud of the fact that we're measuring, but I'm also proud of the outcome. We've 87% of the institutions eligible have applied and are using it. We actually had over 1,000 people on a Zoom call a year back, you know, to learn about it. So it's actually picking up steam. I will say a couple of things about that program. I always hoped it would go away. And, you know, I sort of drug my feet on 5 years of life because I think it will become part of the culture. It'll just be the way we do things, and the institutions will actually do it. And we won't have to continue this government grant program forever.
Right.
It's a great example of government helping getting something going that will then have a life and a culture of its own. So I'm really proud of that. The other thing about that is I noticed that many of the private textbook publishers are starting to have offerings in this arena so that textbooks are online. So the whole textbook arena is shifting toward this, and maybe we, the government, maybe we, the state, won't have to continue to fund it much more than the 5 years we already have.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight and a really excellent point that you make, when sometimes government policies can be what pushes our society to change. And I hope, you know, in 10 years, open textbooks are just the way everyone does it, you know.
Sure.
And the idea of spending, you know, another $1,000 just to get the edition that has a few grammatical changes is a thing of the past. But it's really excellent to see some of the data you guys have collected. The rate of participation from institutions and the amount of money you save students is really impressive. And it's great to see bills pass that have such a tangible impact on the lives of Coloradans.
And one thing that I find encouraging is that the students, people are using it, say that the use of those textbook is as good and sometimes better than actual printed text.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Win for everybody. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. Again, appreciate your leadership and your insight on the issues we spoke about today. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me and share some of that insight with our members.
All right, thank
Have a
you.
great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, take care. Bye.